so gifted that his version of reality was something we were willing to accept. It just came out of his hands like that. If you listen to old Van Halen bootlegs, the whole package is already there. He's playing like a madman. And he said that he would tell him I would just sit on the edge of my bed and practice and practice and practice. But the truth is he was that good. Watching him, he'd do the most insane stuff while laughing and smoking the cigarette. He was the real thing. He also said that Eddie was playing the entire time he was interviewing him, and he would punctuate his sentences with the guitar, which is kind of funny.
Well, that's so believable,
oh,
right?
Yeah, totally. He fiddles and fiddles and fiddles. And then he also said that once he gave him a guitar and Billy started playing, he said to him, "Oh my God, you can actually play." It's almost like he thought he was just sort of an alternative guy, but he couldn't really play. But when he knew that he was like Billy's a fantastic guitarist, and he said he started telling me all this guitar stuff and showing me equipment. It's like he became like, oh, I was entered in another club, which is interesting. And he also said he was like an Olympic coach looking at my form. Once he saw my form, I was in another club in his head, which was kind of funny. So that was a nice description. Billy Corgan, very cool guy. I love interviews with Billy. He's very intelligent, and he's incredibly talented. I'm a big Smashing Pumpkins fan, and what a Van Halen fan he is. You have no idea. He fucking loves Van Halen. He says, don't be fooled by the fact that I'm from the alternative generation. I love Eddie Van Halen. So that was nice to hear. What did you make of that, Dave?
Yeah, there's a great interview with him on YouTube on how the music business really works.
Oh, the one with Joe Rogan?
It might be with Joe Rogan. It probably is. I forget. But that is a great interview.
Fantastic.
For anybody who wants to know how it works.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Is very well spoken.
Oh, yeah. He's incredibly bright.
He tells it straight out.
Yep.
And really a well-spoken guy. Great guitarist. Very underrated.
Yeah.
I just thought, it was nice to hear he had nice things to say about Ed, and I wasn't surprised he was holding a guitar the whole time. I mean, it seems like that's what a lot of people say is, Ed never went anywhere without the guitar.
Right.
Yeah.
It
was almost like his binky, his safety.
Right, yeah. It was his thing.
The guitar.
Well, that's who he was and what he did. So I think that made sense. So now this is kicking up some dust, and the weird thing is everybody's acting like this is new, and it's not. This Eddie Van Halen cover of Jimi Hendrix, If 6 Was 9. Now, we talked about this before, right, Dave?
We must have.
Yeah.
And even if we didn't, you're right. This thing has been out for years.
Yeah, years. But all of a sudden, keyboardist David Garfield put that song on a new EP that him and Guitar World had a premiere on. So keyboardist David Garfield has played with everybody from Larry Carlton and Steve Lukather to George Benson and Smokey Robinson. So he's been around for a while. The cut appears on the new EP Guitar Heroes OTB Volume 1, and it features singer and guitarist Michael Landau, bassist Will Lee, and drummer Simon Phillips. But right up front, they have Eddie Van Halen, who kind of a wild guitar performance of a Hendrix song, If 6 Was 9. And here's a clip. And it appears on this EP, which was recorded back in 1996 at Chick Corea's Mad Hatter Studios in L.A. and engineered by Alan Hirschberg, and Eddie did some overdubs at 5150. At the time, Garfield was working on the project, I guess, a tribute to Jeff Porcaro in honor of the late drummer. But I think we talked about this, Dave, in one of the January episodes for Eddie's birthday. Do you remember this?
Maybe we talked about it, like Ed's guest appearances.
No, it was the whole special that we did. I believe it was on all the non-Van Halen tracks Eddie was on.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what it was. Yeah, it was in January 2017. Now, Garfield says, I went up to his house to work on the tracks with him, and he was so cool. Talking about Eddie. We bonded over keyboards, too, and after that session, we played a live gig together at the Baked Potato along with Steve Lukather and Mike Landau. And he says we continue to stay in touch, and he would call me out of the blue from time to time asking for help and keyboard-related stuff. I even found a guy to travel with him on tour and play additional parts off stage as well as be his keyboard tech, which I believe was Fitz. That guy, Alan Fitzgerald, I think his name is.
Well, he was definitely one of them.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right.
So, I don't know. All of a sudden, people are acting like this is a new cut, but...
I will say, though, that the version of that song, If 6 Was 9, that just came out, is a somewhat different version than the one that appeared over 20 years ago. This one has a longer intro from Ed at the beginning, and I think the song is somewhat remixed. So,
okay,
same song, different mix.
Gotcha.
I think there's some more of Ed in it.
Okay. All right, cool. Excellent. That's great. Now, also, Dweezil Zappa, Dave, you mentioned him earlier in this conversation. Dweezil Zappa is doing a Van Halen podcast, if you can believe this. So he teamed up with Premier Guitar, which is a magazine. It's not an ongoing podcast. I guess like a limited sort of run. You know what I mean? Like a mini-series or whatever you want to call it. But what he did was he put together a whole bunch of guitarists, and he was talking about all these different Van Halen albums. So he says he started working on it prior to Eddie's death. And there's a quote from Dweezil. He says, I was really hoping to share these stories with Edward. It would have been a dream to have an episode with him that would have explored his own musical journey, his sudden loss, has inspired an even deeper connection to his music for me and so many others. We want to honor him and celebrate him. So, on his podcast, okay, he has Steve Vai talking about Van Halen 1. He has Paul Gilbert from Mr. Big talking about Van Halen 2. Nuno Betancourt of Extreme talking about Fair Warning. Billy Corrigan from Smashing Pumpkins talking about Fair Warning. Mark Tremonti from Alter Bridge, from Creed, and from Tremonti talking about Diver Down. Joe Satriani talking about For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. James Valentine talking about OU812. Mark Lettieri talking about 5150. Andy Wood discussing Balance, and Jennifer Batten on 1984. Because each episode, Zappa and his guests share personal stories about the Van Halen albums that affected their own development as a musician. It's a 30-episode podcast. It'll be available exclusively through DweezilZappa.com. This is going to cost you, folks. And it's going to cost you a pretty penny, if you know what I mean. He's going to charge for this, and a portion of the proceeds will go to benefit Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation and Feeding America. And there's some different packages, one where you actually get a subscription to Premier Guitar Magazine, and proudly sponsored by Walrus Auto, and it's called Runnin' with the Dweezil. What do you think of that, Dave?
So you got to pay, huh?
You gotta pay, you know? Hey, look, Rocky Balboa used to say, hey, you wanna dance, you gotta pay the band. You wanna borrow, you gotta pay the man.
I guess I can't argue with that.
I guess so. Moving on, Dave, moving on. Eddie Van Halen's guitars sold at an auction. Oh, this caused up some heat. Several of Eddie Van Halen's guitars, which were his Kramer electric guitar, which he built with his guitar tech, Mac Bruck, at his home studio, 5150, sold for $231,000 and change. And also his 2004 EVH Charvel Art Series electric guitar went for $140,800. And his non-playing prop guitar, used by the child actor Brian Hitchcock, who played the young Eddie Van Halen in Hot for Teacher video, sold how much, Dave? What do you think? It's a non-playing guitar. It's a prop.
$40,000.
Oh, you're close, you son of a bitch. $50,000. And let me tell you, Wolf was not happy about this. He wanted everybody to know the 3 guitars that are striped were sold at an auction for charity. But, he says, quote from Wolf, I had nothing to do with this. I would never sell any of my father's guitars. They are priceless to me. They belong in a museum, if anything. The stories for this have been saying that they were iconic guitars. Not true. That makes them seem like the Frankenstein or the Shark guitar were sold. Yeah, that's bullshit. One of the guitars auctioned off was actually a gift, so yeah, seems a little shitty if you ask me. I initially thought that this was a charity auction, but it wasn't. Just some people taking advantage of the situation and selling anything that had to do with my father. Oh boy, so Mr. Wolf is not happy about that, but what can you do, Dave? What can you do?
No, I mean, I get why he's not happy, but, other people own those guitars and had the right to sell them.
Yeah.
And, I get it. They were, were they touched by Ed for like 3 seconds and that's the selling point? Is that...
Yeah, well, they were, I guess they were Ed's guitars that he gifted to other people that then sold them. What Wolf is saying is they weren't one of, like, his guitars that he recorded with, that he toured with. It was like his, like, personal guitars. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I get it.
Yeah,
but it's close enough,
yeah,
I guess.
Right, close enough.
I mean, look, if they were really, like, bogus BS guitars, they wouldn't have gone for the money they sold for.
Exactly. So now, legendary producer by the name of Butch Vig, Dave. He is the producer of Nirvana's Nevermind. He is also the drummer for the band Garbage. He kind of talked a little bit about Van Halen, gave you a little peek into something. So he was contacted to work on A Different Kind of Truth while he was working on Wasted Light with Foo Fighters. He says the band found a bunch of jams they had done back in the day with Ted Templeman. They had these reel-to-reels they were working on. He says, I was curious and interested, but then I called a couple of people and they said, you don't want to go down that path. It's a nightmare trying to get them to focus and trying to get Eddie to focus, and it's going to be a thankless job. You do not want to do that. So he passed on the job, and Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins said, maybe you should, dude. Maybe you should do it. And then they were like, maybe just you shouldn't. Maybe you could just let them do their thing. So Butch Vig, considered as a producer for A Different Kind of Truth, but passed on it. What do you think of that?
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Very wild.
Well, it just goes to show that John Shanks beat the odds, I guess. Worked with these guys to do an album. So hats off to the guy for getting it done with them.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of auctions, Alex Van Halen's stage-played 1980 drum kit is up for sale. This is from the 1980 Invasion Tour. It's for sale on Reverb.com for guess how much, Dave? Take a guess how much.
$200,000.
Ooh, $275,000. So you were right close there. You're right in the neighborhood. So it looks like you're going to be bidding, possibly.
I don't think I have the
room. You got room in your...
I don't think I have... Does anybody have... You need a room for Al's drum set. You can't just put it in a room. It needs its own room, the size of that thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this thing is huge. It was previously displayed in the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Ohio in the museum.
I saw that drum set.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
And the kit has 2 custom articulated drums. Each have more than 5 feet long, and in addition to an impressive array of floor toms, and it's a gong and a myriad of cymbals, Dave. So it is available at Reverb.com if you guys want to go buy it. It is for sale. Also moving on, Joe Satriani said on the Behind the Vinyl podcast that he was two-hand tapping before he ever heard Eddie Van Halen. He says, I think just like Eddie, because we were the same age and started playing pretty much at the same time, we saw other people on TV doing it. And he said, I saw the guitar players in Wishbone Ash. That was a show in America called Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. I think Wishbone Ash was on one night, and my dad was watching it, and I walked into the room for a second. I saw this guy playing with his fingers, and I'm like, oh, my God. And then he went right up to his room, picked up his guitar, and then tried it out. He said, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that all over the place. But he did say the brilliance of Eddie is what he did with the finger tapping. He says, what makes Eddie so special? Why did that genius just say, well, I'll just take that and do this with it. And he did, and we all responded and it was a godsend. The first time I heard Eddie was when Eruption came on the radio, and I was sitting there with my guitar just jamming along, saying, yeah, and my jaw just dropped. It just made me smile. I was so happy. So what he's saying is Eddie might not have been the first to tap, the two-finger tap, but he said it's what he